Welcome to this week's With Liberty and Justice for Some. I'm Mark Payne. Another crazy week in Washington with the Trump-Musk administration. More overreach, having an unelected billionaire in charge of the federal government spending agency by agency. He and a bunch of folks, including big balls and other 19 and 20-year-olds, is a little surreal. The good news, there's more legal challenges to these illegal actions by the president, and that's very positive. A lot of groups fighting back hard, and we're supporting many of those lawsuits. But also, we find the administration not accepting the court orders. USAID workers went back to work on Monday and were sent away once again. So we'll see what happens next. The most important thing is that all of this is about the holy grail for the Republicans. That's their tax cut bill for the wealthiest, so that Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and, of course, Donald Trump and most of the people who belong to Mar-a-Lago will get a tax cut. It's at the expense of all the rest of us, from federal employees to programs that affect people back home. So this week, we have a guest that's perfect for this conversation. Erica Payne of Patriotic Millionaires is a group of high net worth individuals who are basically telling us how the tax system is a scam and works for them, and they want to be taxed more. But this helps hopefully present what we're looking at with the Republican tax bill and what we need to do. So I hope you enjoy this week's interview, and thanks for listening. This podcast is really going to be in two parts. The first part is just a short, single question that we're going to ask of people from all walks of life that work with the federal government, from advocates, lobbyists, elected officials, and others, about what they would change with federal government. And then we're going to go into a much longer, meaty interview with some of the biggest newsmakers and experts around the country so that we can really learn an in-depth amount of information about subjects that too often just don't get talked about. I'm with Alex Lawson from Social Security Works. Alex, thanks for being here. Just have a quick question for you. If you could change, you had this special magic wand to change any one law in federal government, what would that one change be that you'd like to see done?
Oh, that's such a tough question.
There's a lot of areas, right?
Yeah, to be an omnibus is what I do. I'm going to mush
You're
a lot
use the
of
system.
them together.
I love it.
But just to highlight, something that I think would do an enormous, it would change the whole game, is to guarantee health care for every person in this country. And make that guaranteed health care, a single payer system. It was originally included in the Social Security Act, right? The New Dealers always knew that you can't have a secure retirement if you're one illness or injury away from bankruptcy, right? You can't have a secure working life if you're one illness or injury away from, the poverty. So if we didn't have insurance corporations and pharmaceutical corporations that had control over our lives and deaths, right? And the life and death of our loved ones. That would be, I think, if I had to choose one, I couldn't omnibus.
I know.
I feel like that would actually allow us, it would give us, because it would give working people so much more freedom and ability to organize that then we could expand Social Security, build an economy that's not based on, the Pentagon sucking up all of the money, all of the different things. The key is if we can give people the ability to have that freedom and security so that they're not locked into some job that they hate because they're afraid of losing their insurance. And we're the only country amongst our peer nations that has this cruel and stupid system. So it's not even hard. It's all about building power and political will to take on the pharmaceutical corporations, to take on the insurance corporations. That's what, if I had my magic wand, I'd do it. But magic wand is organizing and time. So I wish it happened faster, but I'm certain that we will get there as we work on it.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Alex.
Thanks.
If you agree with the 70-some-odd% of the American people who think the economy is rigged against them, I've got news for them. It is rigged against them. And the way to rig an economy, you start with the tax code.
The biggest battle of the year and maybe of the Trump presidency will be a reconciliation bill that has a huge tax break for the wealthiest in this country. Now, he did it the last time he was president as well. Something like 80% plus of the money in the tax break bill went to the top 1%, leaving pennies for the rest of us. But that tax bill racked up trillions of dollars in debt that many of us are going to be repaying for a while. And all we really got were those few pennies. By passing a giant tax cut bill in a reconciliation bill, something we'll talk about soon on this podcast, it'll pass with a whole bunch of other bad ideas. And we're hearing there could be a giant corporate tax cut in the works as well. So, let's just face it, Trump cares about the wealthiest in this country. He cares about the people who can afford to belong to Mar-a-Lago. And when you saw the parade of oligarchs at his inaugural and the billionaires he's putting in his administration, it's very clear who Donald Trump cares about. He often will dangle an imaginary trans girl playing sports or a rare non-citizen who commits a crime as shiny objects, as misdirection. And in the meantime, he's stealing your wallet and your watch and your belt, and suddenly you're pantsless and your pants are on the ground. So how do we push back against this? Well, one way is to talk to other people who are wealthy, who could also game the system like Trump and his buddies, but they happen to have a moral compass, and it simply won't let them do the same things. And my guest this week is Erica Payne, who is the founder and president of Patriotic Millionaires. It's a nonpartisan organization of Americans with high net worth so that wealthy people pay a greater share of their income in taxes. Wow. That is certainly not the Mar-a-Lago crowd. Further, Erica co-wrote a book called Tax the Rich, which I've read, and I think maybe one of the very best books I have read that simply and clearly lays out the tax scams that the rich abuse to get wealthier and that leave us, all the rest of us, just picking up the tab. It is a great book, and I highly recommend it. So with that, welcome, Erica Payne. Thanks so much for being with us.
Absolutely. So happy to be here.
Well, in talking to you, I kind of feel like we're getting like secret classified information that's normally preserved for the wealthy on how to game the system and avoid taxes. But you're here to blow the whistle and expose the corrupt system, the tax breaks that are unwarranted. And that really takes guts. It really does. And your organization, since I've been in Congress, I've really appreciated working with, because you do a great job of taking it and making it clear. And that's something that we don't do often well in Washington. So that's why I like the book so much, Tax the Rich. It does that. So if I can, let me just start with some general questions, and then let's get into the nitty gritty of what a tax bill could look like from Trump and what we should look out for. But first, something really, really general, but should we be worried about all of the Silicon Valley oligarchs that were shoulder to shoulder at the Trump inaugural? And if so, why?
Yes. And if so, why? Because it's the first time in American history that what has been hidden came fully to the forefront. They were sitting up there, taking their position of power. So I think in the old adage, a picture tells 1,000 words. This picture told 1,000,000,000,000 words. The net worth of the people on that stage was a level of wealth that is virtually impossible to actually get your head around. And I think that's actually, Mark, maybe a good place to pivot into the book. One of the things about the Patriotic Millionaires is that they're very specific about who they want to tax. And so the book, Tax the Rich, How Lies, Loopholes, and Lobbyists Make the Rich Even Richer, the first chapter is actually, what is rich? And the members of Patriotic Millionaires are people with incomes of over $1 million a year or assets of over $5 million a year. And the organization focuses exclusively on raising taxes with people who fall within or above that demographic. So we do not believe, with some of the current positioning of various parts of the political establishment, to say 400 is rich or 250 is rich. I mean, we can see that that's a very nice living compared to what some other folks make. But the problem with the tax code and the rigging of the economy is actually happening at the very, very top end of the tax code. And so we focus our attention exclusively on that upper echelon, which is the top 1%, and even more importantly on the 0.01%, which is the billionaire class that have become American oligarchs. You hear oligarch, and you also think Russian oligarchs. We actually did a conference 3 years ago called Oligarchs versus All of Us, the fight for power and money. And we referenced the Russian oligarchs that everybody had been reading about in the newspaper, as the Ukraine kind of situation was unfolding, and wanted to bring up the idea that we've got oligarchs right here, and they are just as dangerous, and they are significantly more powerful than people want them to be.
Yeah, you're right. That was a visual. In fact, I think even the fact that they were allowed to bring spouses, but some of the senators and members of Congress in the same room weren't allowed. I mean, Donald Trump said in many ways, whether it be the people he's appointed or that crowd, where he stands. Many in that MAGA crowd kind of parrot what Donald Trump and others in MAGA say about if you have higher taxes on the wealthy, that you're going to somehow stifle the economy, that'll hurt their average worker because you need people to reinvest their wealth, that you need a trickle-down economy, to use a term maybe from the Reagan era, but it still seems to be what they talk about. And I know you talk about it in your book. Is that a fact or myth?
Well, so first of all, let's just go back. I think one of the problems with the tax issue is that it's really confusing. And it's also really boring. As I talk about in the book, it creates situational narcolepsy. You tell somebody you work on tax policy, you're the last person in the room at a cocktail party they want to talk to be clear.
Right.
And they make it really confusing on purpose. And so if you climb into the nitty gritty of tax policy, it makes your head want to explode, because it is really complicated and it's really irritating. And there are teeny tiny little pieces of it that are worth millions and millions of dollars to a small number of people. And that the average American is going to never have any interest in understanding, because they can't, because it is too complicated. So I think we need to start with the idea that tax policy is complicated. They made it that way on purpose. That's number one. Number two, if you agree with the 70 some odd percentage of the American people who think the economy is rigged against them, I've got news for them. It is rigged against them. And the way to rig an economy, you start with the tax code. So the tax code over decades, and I'm just going to go on and put it out there. Both parties have been complicit in rigging the tax code against the average American. It has happened over decades and decades and decades. And regardless of which political party is in charge, the tax rates for the richest people in America have gone in one direction, and that is down. Now, when we want to start thinking about what to do with the tax code, we actually have a really handy moment, because there is a moment when we can hand full responsibility to one party. And that moment was in 2017, when Donald Trump and Republicans in Congress rewrote the entire American tax code. In 2018, for the first time in history, billionaires paid a lower effective tax rate than every single other group of people in America. So from 2017 to 2018, we know that happened. Now, the other way we need to think about taxes, though, is that every single person on the planet who is running for political office wants to talk about what tax cuts are going to do. They want to talk about what in the future, this grand revolution of whatever economic nonsense they brought to the table, as Trump did in 2017, how that's going to spur growth, spur job growth, et cetera. What is more important to understand is what the tax code actually does at that moment. How does it value different kinds of money? What is it taking from one group? What is it taking from another group? What is it not taking from another group? And how does it operate as a whole to structure? It is the most essential element of our economy, Mark, is our tax code. There are other pieces. We talk about a lot about wages as the patriotic millionaires, but the two bookends of an economy are wages and taxes. And if you want to rig an economy, you start with tax code. So we need to understand that as a first order of business.
Yeah, and one of the things I like to remind people is it's tax break is also a tax expenditure, just like you would spend money on housing or healthcare or anything else. You make a choice, and if you give it as a tax break, you certainly are taking money away from programs that I think the average person benefits far more from. But can you just talk about some of the tax breaks that currently exist that you think are just two or three of the most egregious, and why?
Well, number one of the most egregious things I think about the tax code is that the federal tax code currently taxes people into poverty. So if you look at how much it costs for let's take an average single person, the median cost of living for a single adult with no children is $40,000 a year. So you need about 20 bucks an hour, $40,000 a year to be able to afford any sort of personal stability. And by the way, it's not very much stability. That gives you like a couple $100, every 2 weeks for food, rent at like 700. You can go on the MIT living wage calculator and take a look at that figures. Right now, we have a federal tax code that begins taxing people before they have met their own cost of living. So we actually have a tax code that doesn't tax a lot of billionaires. There have been multiple years where billionaires and corporations, specific billionaires and corporations, including some of the biggest ones, FedEx, okay, Nike, these kinds of companies, they paid zero in taxes, zero to repair the roads, zero to clean the atmosphere from their gas pollution, zero to put in the kind of, 0% to run the country. Whereas a working person who makes $35,000 a year pays out money in taxes to take care of these things that corporations are benefiting from. So I think if we're going to start a tax conversation, any person in this country who makes less than $40,000 a year, if you don't have any children, and about $80,000 if you do have a kid, you are currently living in a tax regime which was passed by Republicans, led by Donald Trump, that taxes you into poverty as a matter of public policy, and that simultaneously does not tax the billionaire class. Okay, start there. The second thing that I think people need to understand, and again, that's not hard to understand, Mark. So I do, tax policy is complicated. Getting screwed is not complicated.
Right.
Okay? So people are getting screwed. They're being taxed into poverty when billionaires aren't paying anything. That's number one. Number two, the tax code is different depending on how you make it. Some money receives preferential treatment in the tax code, and other money does not receive preferential treatment in the tax code. Meaning, if you and I make the same amount of money, but we make it in different ways, we're going to have wildly different tax bills. And I'm going to give you an example.
Yeah.
I work all year, 50 hours, 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, and I make $100,000. I'm going to pay about $9,000 in federal taxes on that $100,000. Okay. If you're a billionaire and you click a button on an E-Trade account and sell some stock for $100,000, can you tell me how much tax you're going to pay on that $100,000 you made?
You're going to pay $0. Cap gains rate? Okay, all right, $0.
Wow. Okay, so cap gains. That is capital gains versus ordinary income. So ordinary income, you work, you go to a job, you get a paycheck, taxes come out of that paycheck. Capital gains, you buy stock, it goes up, you sell the stock, whatever the difference is the gain that you made, you pay taxes on that gain. The capital gains tax rate is about half the tax rate of ordinary income. So in other words, in the game of your money versus their sweat, or their money versus your sweat, or whoever's on whoever's side, sweat gets taxed the highest. So you work and gets taxed the highest. The second, then capital gains get a break. Guess who gets the biggest break? All those rich kids, all those trust fund babies who were sitting there not doing a single thing except for snorting coke, riding on private jets, and tanning themselves in St. Barb's. They pay the lowest tax rate of all. Right now, they can inherit more than $25 million tax free.
That's crazy.
Right?
Hey, yes.
Right. And you wonder why this country's screwed up. It starts right there. Just those two pieces of this puzzle.
No, I think a lot of people don't quite get that. I know some people think, well, maybe someday I'll be wealthy. And of course, we know that rate's going to be much smaller than people who believe that. But what are you looking for in what Donald Trump is going to try to do? What are the things that most concern you that he might try to put into that reconciliation bill that if we could let people know about so they understand how they're being screwed, could maybe encourage them to call their senators and their representatives and say, hey, not this time, or don't do this because it's not going to benefit me. It's just going to benefit those folks who went to the inauguration and sat behind Donald Trump.
Well, I mean, we got to go back to the beginning of the program, Mark. So this is going to be a 51 vote threshold. So most public policy, just to explain to your listeners, most public policy has a 60 vote threshold because you need to get, the founding fathers set it up so that you'd have a reasonable amount of some cross-partisan cooperation. For budget matters, they have a 51 vote threshold. And with conservative control of all three branches of government and a pretty, a reasonable margin in the Senate, they're going to pass a 51 vote threshold. And so what they're going to do with that 51 vote threshold is they're going to extend or attempt to extend they're going to move the Trump tax code from a decade-long window of existence into permanent policy. So the Trump tax code, the biggest parts of the Trump tax code, the parts for individuals, expire this year. If you merely let those tax cuts expire, wealthy people will be paying more of their fair share. Okay. So the extension of this tax code as it exists, which taxes people into poverty and which values every dollar a rich person makes over every dollar a poor person makes, that's the only thing you need to know about this tax code. And that any extension of that is going to be more of the same. What they're going to do is throw a little teensy little bone to people.
Right.
And they're going to do that probably with eliminating tax on tips. Now, why are they eliminating tax on tips? The main reason they're evaluating getting rid of tax on tips is so that hedge fund managers into the future can get a small base salary, a large tip from their happy customers and pay no taxes on those tips. So just be looking out for that. This is not, trust me, this is not about your local wait person at your favorite restaurant. This is not about that. And Democrats wanted to come up with some good ideas, because I really think it's important in this moment that you don't just say something's bad, you say something that would be better. The best thing the Democrats could support right now is a cost of living exemption on federal taxes. Eliminate all federal taxes underneath the cost of living for a single adult with no children, $40,000 a year. The federal government should not be taxing its people into poverty in order to pay for the whims of billionaires.
It's a great point. Do you think, I've heard a little bit of a debate, and I haven't heard a resolution to it yet, but, should we really call them tax extensions? Because it's a new decision to make this tax break. And if you say extensions, does that sound too soft on what they really are? Because if we have a brand new bill that's going to last for a long period of time and it's got all these tax breaks, does extension sound too soft, I guess?
Mark, I take your point. I don't know that the average American makes the distinction between an extension of this or, a pay for this and that. I think the important thing for people to understand is what the tax code that governs the economy does. And this tax code that they want to perpetuate into the future taxes working people into poverty. It lets billionaires, millionaires, and corporations completely off the hook with their tax obligation. And it values the money that rich people make more than it values the money that poor people make. So yes, it's a decision, but I think it should be understood not as an extension of a series of policies, but an extension of a regime that has created an economy that working people are drowning under.
Yeah.
It's an entire code.
Yeah.
It's a book of rules and regulations that ensure that working people are going to lose this game. That's what it is. Understand it as an entirety, as an entire entity that controls the economy, rather than saying this little bit, this little bit. No, there are some fun little bits that ought to be implemented, like the Fat Cat Act, which we support. We support some of these small pieces. So the Fat Cat Act taxes private jet owners. Okay. That's a great thing to do. They pay nothing for running the TSA, making sure that the air marshals do what all they're supposed to do. They pay basically for none of that. So let's get some of those fat cats to pay some of that. But those clever and wonderful ideas, which should be implemented, are not the base problem. The base problem is that the tax code that currently exists in the United States, which was implemented by Republicans, and Democrats didn't make that many changes to it, thanks Sinema, Manchin, and some other folks, still Maggie Hassan, Mark Warner, they weren't part of it, but they might be part of it this next time. This tax code rigs the economy, ensuring that we become even more unequal, even more quickly over time. We are at historic levels of inequality. We have created a game of economic Jenga, and the entire society is in the process of collapsing, and the tax code is the reason.
So what do you think, for folks who want to try to push back against this, and I think, right now people are concerned about a lot of things happening, But what's the best way? What's the message for someone to say to their representative or their senator so that they can be heard?
If you have a Democratic senator or House member representing you, you
Mhm.
have one very easy message: no vote is better than a vote. If you do not vote for this bill, this tax cut, this tax code will expire. So if
Gotcha.
you if you have a Democrat representing you, you need to put a lot of pressure on your representative to come up with a shared alternate vision of what the tax code should look like. Because unfortunately, we are in a situation where the Democratic Party has also had a lot of undue influence of money in politics. Now, you saw Kamala Harris, there was a front page New York Times article before the election that said billionaires quietly press Harris on tax reform. I'm not
Right.
sure how quiet it is if it's on the front page of the New York Times, but
Good point.
4 days later, she gave a speech in Pennsylvania where she called for raising the tax rate on capital gains, but she did not call for equalizing those rates. So she maintained a preferential treatment for capital gains in
I'm
her
going to
ideas.
stop you just for can I stop you
Yeah,
just for a second? Equalizing, explain that because that's a
equalizing.
concept.
So basically, as I said earlier, right now, if you go to a job, you pay more in taxes than if you live off your investments. And if you live off investments, you pay more in taxes than you make off of your inheritance. So we have different kinds of treatment for different kinds of money. The patriotic millionaires believe that all money should be treated equally over $1 million. So whether you're
Right.
making
Sweat versus other. Yeah.
doesn't matter. Money
Gotcha.
is money is money is money. Okay.
Yep.
And we right now treat it differently. We should not be treating it differently. What Kamala Harris said in her speech was that she wanted to close the gap between capital gains tax rates and ordinary income, but she declined to say that she would even them out to
Equalize.
be the same,
Gotcha.
which Biden had called for. So what that said to me is even she, as immersed in this world as she is, does not see the order of magnitude of the problem that a rigged tax code has, and she's caving to billionaire pressure to even on that one piece to say, it's okay that people who live off their money pay lower tax rates than people who live off their hard work.
What's the message to Republicans? If you have a Republican rep.
If you're a message to a Republican, say if I continue to pay a higher tax rate than people who live off their inheritance, I'm not going to vote for you again. That's the message.
Yep.
That's the only message that they're going to hear. They're going to pass. Here's the thing: they're going to pass this bill, Mark, and they're going to pass it with a 51 vote threshold. And so, on some level, I think that what might be the smartest move for Democrats is to let them do whatever they want to do in this tax bill and let everybody in America know what it is. And Americans are smart, they will respond accordingly. In 2017, that's what happened. Charles Koch announced today or yesterday that he's going to spend $20 million trying to sell this piece of crap to the American people. He spent $20 million last time in 2017 funding a job creators bus tour right after he gave Paul Ryan $500,000 to his leadership PAC for ushering in like the biggest tax abomination that we've seen in this country since before World War II. David Koch is estimated to have made over $1 billion in savings on taxes during the last tax code. But the good news is that he spent $20 million trying to sell people on a bunch of nonsense last time. And the tax bill last time, Republicans tried to pull this nonsense with Trump in charge, ended up costing them the House in 2018. And it was the lowest point of public approval in his presidency. So I say Charles Koch spend another $20 million and just amplify to everybody what this tax code actually looks like, what this tax code does to working people, which is tax them into poverty. Okay. It makes millionaires pay lower taxes than working people, and it makes billionaires pay taxes not at all. Share that message with people while you're simultaneously telling them that there is a better way in America and that we need to put that better way in place.
It is important to stress that the lowest point of the last Trump presidency for his popularity was when he did his tax bill, because people did realize they were getting screwed. But we need to make it really understand what's happening this time, because I think they're going to throw in a few other really ugly things in this bill as well, because, with right now a 1-seat margin in the House until there's some special elections and a tight margin in the Senate, we can stop some things legislatively, but we need that people power. And I think, if people remember that they had power last time, and we can have that happen again. How about corporate taxes real quickly? The rate was 35% prior to the Trump presidency. He lowered it to 21%. I know during the campaign, people talked about all kinds of other smaller numbers, but what does that mean for the average worker when we have, again, a non-equalized tax rate really for corporations?
So let's talk about corporations for a minute, because I think the rhetoric that the other side uses around corporations and corporate tax cuts is the most instructive for how to respond to it. Okay, so they have a narrative that is tax cuts create jobs. So last time, as I said, they spent $20 million on a bus tour, the Job Creators bus tour, went all over the country trying to tell people that tax cuts for corporations lead to job creation. That is incorrect. Okay, consumer demand leads to job creation. Job creators, tax cuts as a job creation mechanism is nonsensical on its face. And Mark, let me tell you why. It's because companies only pay taxes on their profits. Profits are calculated after expenses like payroll. So cutting taxes after you've taken out an expense and believing that that is going to make you hire more people, that doesn't even make sense on its face. And then we have lots and lots of examples of some of the biggest cheerleaders last time on corporate taxes going on and on and on about all the jobs they are going to create with this great tax cut, and then turning around. I'll give you one example. Randall Stevenson was the chair of AT&T. Okay, he went everywhere saying that the correlation between tax cuts and job creations was very, very tight. Okay, after that tax code passed in 2017, guess how many people AT&T laid off the following year?
How many?
40,000 people lost their jobs after AT&T got a tax cut that the CEO swore was going to lead him to hire more people.
Wow.
Okay.
That's the stories we got to get out. That's the stories we got to get out. Yeah.
Yeah. How much money did he make in bonuses from?
I'm sure he didn't take a bonus. I'm sure he didn't do that.
Yeah.
How much? How big was his bonus?
It was 10. I can't remember.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Like that,
Yeah. Well, so let me ask you this. It's a little unrelated to tax bill, but I want to go to a couple other areas that you guys have been very outspoken on. One, you have proposed a wealth tax as a solution for economic disparity. How would that work, and why is it needed?
So let me tell you why it's needed, because that's the most important part.
Sure.
If you are a homeowner and you buy a house, you are probably going to pay property taxes on that house. In most states, you will pay property taxes on that house. If you are a billionaire who owns 800 gold coins, 4 racehorses, 12 Picasso paintings, a yacht, come up with every single other thing that is not a house, you will pay $0 on those assets. You will pay $0 in property tax. Whereas if you're an average American, most of your wealth is held in your house, you pay property taxes. So right now, much like we have billionaires paying no taxes and working people being taxed into poverty, we also have a situation in the tax code where if you are a person of modest means who owns a home, you pay more in property taxes than a billionaire who, rents the top 4 floors of the Ritz-Carlton for a year and owns, yachts and every other thing. You pay more in property taxes than that person. So that's the problem that we're trying to solve. The other problem that we're trying to solve is the buy, borrow, die problem, which is that our tax system is oriented around income, how much income a person comes in, and then we tax that income. Wealthy people, and hear me when I say this because it sounds weird, wealthy people don't have any income. The richest people in the country don't have any income. So what our chair, Morris Pearl, does when he needs money, he goes into his brokerage account and he just makes the cash balance negative. But there's no event that leads to income. So if you want to only tax income, you have to accept that you are never going to tax the richest people in the country. If you
Right.
think that you should tax the richest people in the country because we are currently taxing people into poverty, then you have to find a way to tax wealth. So taxing wealth can come in a lot of different ways. Senator Ron Wyden, who is an incredible champion for fixing this rigged system of ours, has a billionaire's minimum income tax that he's introduced. That is a tax on unrealized gains. There are lots of proposals out there. What was unique about the wealth tax that the patriotic millionaires are pushing, which was the Oligarch Act last Congress, will introduce something similar to it this Congress. But we attached the level of tax on the wealth to the level of inequality in the country. So if inequality goes up, the tax on wealth goes up. As inequality goes down, the tax on wealth goes down. And we thought that that was a very important mechanism because let's be clear, we're a group of millionaires. Everybody wants to be rich. We're happy for people to be rich. We want tons of rich people, a huge middle class, and a few folks who feel like they have a chance to get where they want to get. That's not what we have now. Right now, we have a tiny number of, incredibly wealthy people who are spending all their money to screw everything up for everybody else. That's what we need to stop. So at the very top end of the tax code, which is in the wealth area, where you don't have income, we need to tax people in order to make them less rich. And we need to understand them less as individuals and more as unelected nation states that have all the rights and privileges of American citizenship and none of the obligation. And so we have these freeloaders in our country who have sucked the lifeblood out of our people, sucked wages out of their pocket, are running basically, organizations that are basically not businesses, they're human exploitation schemes, and they're enriching themselves to a grotesque degree in the process, and they're screwing up our democracy with it. And so obviously we need those people to have less money. The only way to have them have less money is to tax the ever living shit out of them.
Hear ya. All right. Let me ask you another issue. Help me break this myth. Every dollar that's invested in the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, supposedly between $5 and $9 gets brought in from tax cheats, mostly wealthy folks trying to get away without paying their fair share. One of the problems is, we hear from all the Republicans in Congress that they want to defund the IRS, that they're attacking the average person. Donald Trump just, I think in the last few weeks, has proposed that one of his rallies that we shift more IRS workers to work at the border to stop people coming in, besides being a ridiculous suggestion for a number of reasons. That doesn't help the average American if we're not going after those who cheat on their taxes. Can you explain a little bit about that issue, about why actually investing in the IRS provides essentially I don't want to call it a tax break, but provides relief for the average working person?
Yeah, well, first of all, we've had a discussion about defunding the police as a nation. And I think we concluded that whatever people concluded for that, but I'm certainly not going to lead off defunding the police. Okay. But so again, let's go back to how big is this problem? Does it matter? Trump's IRS commissioner, when hauled in front of the Senate committee, said we are losing $1 trillion. We are not losing $1 billion. We are not even losing $10 billion. We are losing $1 trillion to tax cheats, most of them who are extraordinarily wealthy. So what Democrats did was they made two alterations to the Trump tax code, basically. One was to fund the IRS. So at least our tax code, as inadequate as it was and would be enforced. And Janet Yellen said specifically that the money must be designated to go after the wealthiest tax cheats, not after ordinary Americans. That directive. The very first vote that Republican lawmakers took when they took over the House was to defund the IRS.
Yep.
Your politician has as their first priority taking the cops off the beat of a group of people who owe this country $1 trillion. Your congressman should be replaced.
Yeah. No, thank you for explaining that. It's always one of those frustrating ones for those of us who understand how you fund government and not having people go after tax sheets. I've actually had someone who has some means recently say, you know what, I'm tired of being honest because look at Trump and all the rest what they get away with, and that if that's part of the message that comes out of the Trump presidency, then we've got a whole lot of other problems. So let
No,
me
and
talk. Oh, go
I
ahead.
hit on this point for just a second.
Yeah.
Um, I don't have any trouble being honest. Most Americans don't have any
Mhm.
trouble being honest. It's not difficult to be honest. So I would push your friend to challenge themselves about what is the obligation of people of affluence during a time when it is abundantly clear that our society is teetering on the brink. What is their
Yeah.
obligation? And I tell you what, they are putting themselves to bed in some high thread count sheets, riding fancy cars around with all of their angst. And I think they can reach inside themselves and do better than they're doing right now. So, all
Yeah.
due respect to somebody thinking, well,
I
you
hear
know,
you.
a few more bucks if I'm a dishonest shitbag the way the rest of these people are. I would challenge you to think instead about how you can lead and how you can lead with moral, principled positions and a deep understanding of what wealth actually is and what it isn't. Because let me tell you something, it ain't going to make you happy. Really
Yeah.
isn't, you know? And it's a level of wealth that is so outside the scope of human beings' ability to navigate. It will destroy our society, our planet, and hundreds of or millions of lives if we do not get this wealth concentration under control.
Yeah. I think it was more of a sign of exasperation, watching
I know. I
what these people Donald Trump is rewarding some of the worst offenders on the planet, or at least in our country, by what he's doing. And I think that frustration is very clear. In fact, let me end with this question, and then I'll let you open it up if there's anything we didn't talk about that you'd like to raise. But you know, uh, money in politics. You kind of referenced it when you talked about the Koch brothers and what they did after the lax tax cut. This time, we watched Elon Musk spend $250 million to elect Donald Trump. If he's spending 250 million plus dollars to elect Donald Trump, how much of a tax break is this guy going to get? And then we see these shady PACs being set up by these folks to try to influence our elections. Talk about that briefly. Is it free speech, or is this another threat from the oligarchs?
Oh, of course it's not free speech. That's ridiculous. And the fact that they got Citizens United through on that premise is actually the result of a billionaire building the Federalist Society through the Reagan-Meese years and basically taken over a huge swath of the American legal community. So, I mean, the thing I want people to understand, the folks who wanted this all to happen, who wanted these huge tax breaks for folks and who wanted to open up this, somebody like Elon Musk having this much money and then exercising that money in the way that he has done it. They want to create a system that has a permanent underclass who is too exhausted and wiped out to own their own power and do anything different. They want for American families to be broke and exhausted. And they want all of the money to sit in a tiny pot of people who can move it around like checkers on a checkered board. That's what they're looking for. And now, as we go into this tech kind of the fact that they're all tech bros, I mean, they basically want to swap to cryptocurrency and raid the treasury. I mean, that's what's really happening here. And so
Yeah.
the only vote on anything that Republicans have to do on taxes is a no vote. Any Democrat who votes for any part of this should be exorcised from the party immediately.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. It's clear of a message is you just vote against this thing. And if you vote yes, then we're going to get rid of you. I mean, because they want you to dive into the details, and then you're going to miss the forest through the trees. And I think you're right. Keep it plain and simple. So, Erica, thank you so much for your time. I know you guys do a lot of other things around wages and other things, but is there anything else that you just want to add that we didn't get a chance to talk to about tax policy today that you think is important to stress?
I think the most important thing to stress about tax policy today is to not listen to what somebody says something is going to do in the future, but to look at how it values different kinds of money today. What does it do today? What does it say in the black and white script about how your money is treated versus other people's money? What does it say? Does the federal government continue to tax working people into poverty with this next iteration of Trump's vision for what a great tax code looks like? He thinks that's a great tax code. I think it's a crappy tax code.
Yeah. No,
And it's not that complicated. And buy the book because it's easy to understand.
I know. I'm lifting it up again. I know this is a podcast, of lifting a book may seem stupid, but it is on video as well. Tax the Rich. I've read it, and it's an easy read. This is like,
cartoons in it. It's fun.
It is, and it's a great plain book. It's one of these books you can read in segments because the chapters are kind of individualized about things. And then, how do people follow you? How do people follow Patriotic Millionaires? Let's make sure we're putting your information out there.
Oh, yeah. So we're patrioticmillionaires.org, Pat Mills on social media, and we'd love to hear from you. We spend a lot of time talking about a topic that is the sexiest topic in the country, and that's taxes. Nobody thinks it, but we know it. Taxes are the sexiest topic in America. And if you think the economy is rigged, it starts with the tax code. Let's get a new one.
Yeah, no, this is going to be the most consequential thing the Trump administration will do the next 4 years, and they're going to do it right away. They learned a little bit from last time how to do this, and the grift will be quick and mighty. So thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to working with you as this thing unravels and we get a chance to talk more and poke some holes into some of their ideas. So thank you so much, Erica. Thanks for being on today.
Thank you, Mark. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to this week's With Liberty and Justice for Some.